Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching. The safety of humanity is not up for debate. Chancellor Case Nouri's voice rang out, steady and unflinching. The crack of his fist against the polished obsidian table echoed through the vast chamber of the Grand Council. Conversations stopped. Murmurs died. Dozens of alien delegates turned, their eyes locking onto the human representative who had just shattered the rhythm of diplomacy with a single strike. Nor is our right to defend ourselves when conflict reaches the doorstep of our worlds. He straightened, scanning the chamber, his dark eyes locking onto the cold, inhuman gazes of those who would see his people cast out of the galactic stage. The Grand Council was a marvel of architecture, a vast dome of crystalline glass that overlooked the galactic core. Rows of elevated platforms encircled the central arena, where over 50 species held seats of power, their representatives adorned in ceremonial attire, their voices collectively shaping the fate of the galaxy. At the core of this gathering, standing opposite Nouri, was the Accuser, a towering figure clad in ceremonial gold, his broad frame rigid and unmoving. Sevrak of the Zalari stood, his heavy-plated form resembling the dense armor of deep-sea predators. His 6 asymmetrical eyes, sunken beneath a thick crest of ridges, locked onto Nouri with an unwavering stare. When he moved, the faint grind of overlapping plates accompanied him, his clawed hands resting against the podium with deliberate weight. "You speak of necessity, Chancellor Nouri," Sevrak said, his voice a slow, deliberate rasp. "Yet it is the necessity of your species that brings disorder. Humanity has never known restraint." He gestured with one of his 4 arms, and holographic projections flickered to life above the chamber. Battlefields scarred by orbital bombardments, alien ships reduced to smoldering debris, and soldiers clad in human armor standing atop ruined capitals. Across the hall, different species reacted in their own ways. The Olaris, an amphibious race with translucent skin and bioluminescent veins, whispered among themselves, their shifting colors betraying apprehension. The massive Tarsid, bipedal reptilians with horned crests, watched in silence, their cold reptilian eyes flat and emotionless. Among the Yelthari, a race of sleek feathered humanoids, a few inclined their heads toward Nouri, their interest piqued. Nouri didn't flinch as the imagery played. He let the silence stretch, then he continued. "You see devastation," he said, gesturing to the floating images. "But you do not see the moments before. You do not see the colonies set to the torch before our arrival. You do not see the civilians taken as slaves, the children executed in the streets. What you call brutality, we call necessity." His voice grew sharper. "Because when war reaches us, it does not come with rules, nor does it come with mercy, and yet you would have us fight with our hands bound." Sevrak's mandibles flared in what could only be described as a sneer. "The concern is not your willingness to fight, Chancellor. It is your unwillingness to stop." A ripple of agreement moved through the council chamber. A representative of the Vashiri, a humanoid species with deep violet skin and piercing black eyes, leaned forward. His name was Kaldrith, a longtime opponent of human military expansion. "We have all seen it," Kaldrith said smoothly. "Your kind was invited into our wars, into our conflicts as allies. And yet, in every engagement, it is humanity that escalates. You do not merely seek victory, you ensure annihilation." More murmurs. The balance was shifting against him. Nouri took a slow breath, controlled his pulse, and turned his gaze toward the highest seat in the chamber. The Speaker of the Council, an aged Vorkari, his long, ivory-skinned features unreadable. "The question before us is not whether humanity is effective," the Speaker said, his voice deep and resonant. "It is whether humanity is controllable." Nouri smiled, but there was no humor in it. "There it is," he said, stepping forward. "Control. That is what truly concerns you, isn't it? You do not fear what humanity destroys. You fear that we do not ask permission before doing it. Sevrak's mandibles twitched, but he said nothing. Tell me, Nuri continued, his voice measured, his presence commanding. When the Zilari homeworld was besieged, when the skies burned above your cities, who was it that broke the enemy fleet? Who was it that deployed behind enemy lines, cut the head from the invasion, and secured your survival? Sevrak remained silent, but the tension in his posture was answer enough. You remember, Nuri said, as do all of you. His gaze swept the chamber. The Draconis incursions. Humanity ended them. The Igrath War. We turned the tide. Again and again, you have called upon us, and each time we delivered. His voice darkened. And yet, here we are, standing trial for the very thing that has saved you. A few murmurs of agreement this time, but Sevrak was not finished. Yes, you are called upon, the Zilari said, and yes, you win. But the cost is too great. There are no negotiations when humans arrive. There is no diplomacy. You do not win wars. You end them. The holographic images changed again, this time to a scene that silenced even Nuri. A dead world, its atmosphere reduced to black clouds, its oceans boiled away. The remnants of an armada drifted lifelessly above its ruins. The air in the chamber felt heavier. This was your doing, Sevrak said. Not an enemy fleet, not an invasion force. This was a world that no longer exists because of your methods. Silence. Even those who had leaned toward supporting humanity shifted, their uncertainty deepening. Nuri kept his posture firm. He had expected this. Do you know what was on that world? He asked quietly. Sevrak didn't answer. Nuri continued. A war factory. A central hub supplying a fleet that had already reduced 3 civilizations to ash. His eyes locked onto Sevrak's. A choice was made. That world or 10 others. And tell me, Consul, if it had been your world, if your people were the ones standing beneath their fleet's shadow, would you hesitate? Sevrak's mandibles clicked once. Nuri turned away from him, addressing the council at large. You fear us because we do what must be done, he said. But let me ask you this. When the next threat comes, when your defenses crumble and your fleets burn, who will you call? No one answered. No one dared. A heavy silence lingered in the Grand Council chamber, the weight of Nuri's final words pressing down on the gathered delegates. But he wasn't finished. He straightened his posture and let his gaze sweep across the room. You fear us because we do what must be done, he repeated. Then allow me to remind you why. He reached out and activated the central holographic display. The chamber dimmed, and the image of a distant world flickered to life above them, scarred, besieged, and left for dead. The colony was lost before we arrived. Nuri's voice carried through the Grand Council chamber. At least that was what the strategists of this very council concluded. They declared it unsalvageable, condemned the people on that world to die because the odds weren't in their favor. A ripple of discomfort moved through the chamber. Several delegates exchanged glances, some shifting in their seats, others maintaining their rigid postures. The holographic displays flickered to life above them, revealing a barren, wind-swept world. Craters marred its surface, and in the distance, a massive orbital blockade encircled the planet like a noose. This was Ardesh III, Nuri continued. A colony of 80,000 civilians, cut off from the rest of the galaxy when the Vrothik launched their offensive. A full fleet of warships, 17 capital-class vessels, supported by planetary siege weapons, descended upon it. The Council's response? He gestured toward the gathered delegates. Nothing. The risk was too high, the operation unfeasible. His gaze locked onto Sevrak, whose plated features remained impassive. The humans didn't see it that way, Nuri said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. He let the silence stretch, then spoke again, We sent the 12th Fleet. He let the weight of the words settle before delivering the final blow. 7 ships. A murmur swept through the council chamber, a mix of incredulity and intrigue. 7 against 17. It was suicide. The hologram shifted, now showing a grainy tactical display. It marked the human fleet's approach, stark and small against the sheer numbers of the Vrothic armada. The enemy's forces were spread wide, confident in their superiority, Nuri explained. Their ships maintained a high-orbit formation, bombarding the planet at intervals to wear down resistance. They never expected an attack because, to them, there was no force in the galaxy foolish enough to engage them under those conditions. The scene shifted again, displaying a formation of Terran ships diving toward the enemy blockade at impossible speeds. They didn't know humans. The first engagement was brutal. As the 12th Fleet entered the Vrothic sensor range, the Vrothic responded exactly as expected. Overwhelming force. Plasma lances and railgun rounds lit up the void as the enemy fleet opened fire, their barrages tearing through space toward the vastly outnumbered human ships. But we never intended to fight them in open space, Nuri continued. We used what we had, our ships, our crews, and a deep understanding of their arrogance. The hologram zoomed in, showing the human ships breaking formation as they approached the blockade. The 12th Fleet shattered into strike groups, vanishing and reappearing in rapid bursts of light. The Vrothic gunners hesitated. Every time they locked onto a target, it was gone. Their targeting systems scrambled to adjust, but the battlefield was a kaleidoscope of false readings. Then came the drones. Hundreds of them, each broadcasting human signatures, each mimicking attack vectors. Alarms blared across the enemy fleet as they adjusted their formation. Too late. The real assault had already begun. A new feed emerged, Vrothic warships repositioning in confusion, their firing arcs breaking as they tried to track multiple incoming threats. The Vrothic believed they were being flanked. They adjusted their formation to compensate, leaving gaps in their orbital perimeter. That was when the real attack began. Captain Travis Firtham, commander of the UES Breacher, led the assault. His ship, a fast attack frigate, was the first to breach the blockade, its hull skimming dangerously close to the outermost Vrothic battleships. Every cannon on the Breacher fired in sequence, its railguns targeting weapon emplacements, while missile salvos struck shield arrays in rapid succession. The Vrothic forces, unprepared for the sudden ferocity of the attack, scrambled to reposition. We hit them before they could react, Nuri said, his voice steady, and we didn't stop. The battle became a storm of precision strikes. Human ships darted between larger Vrothic vessels, staying in their blind spots, maneuvering through the chaos with pinpoint accuracy. Each kill was calculated, each engagement aimed at further destabilizing the blockade. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, the resistance forces, left for dead by the Council, received a transmission. "This is Captain Travis Firtham of the UES Breacher," the message came through the static. "Hold your ground. We're getting you out of here." The resistance, barely holding out in underground bunkers, rallied. With air support from human ships disabling key artillery emplacements, the colonists fought their way to extraction points. The final phase of the operation was the most dangerous. With the blockade weakened, the Breacher and 2 escort ships broke into low orbit, Nuri continued. Not to fight, but to burn. The holographic display showed the human ships descending toward the planet's upper atmosphere, their hulls glowing with the heat of entry. They fired everything they had into the surface, targeting enemy ground positions, Nuri explained. Not with explosives, but with kinetic rounds, artillery shells the size of drop pods. They struck key enemy fortifications, creating corridors for evacuation. More images appeared. Vrothic command centers collapsing under the weight of tungsten slugs, entire siege positions torn apart by railgun fire, and in the middle of it, human dropships descending through the dust and fire, lifting civilians out of the ruins. "Over the course of 3 hours," Nuri said, his voice quieter now, "we pulled 42,000 souls from the fire." A heavy silence hung in the air. Then Sevrak spoke, his voice sharp as a blade. "And how many did you leave behind?" Nouri's voice didn't rise, but it silenced the room all the same. 38,000. He let the weight of it settle. There was no defense, no justification, just the truth. A cold pause. "You call this victory?" Sevrak asked. Nouri's expression remained stoic. "I call it the only possible outcome." He stepped forward. "Without us, there would have been 0 survivors. Without our ability to adapt, to take risks no one else would, that colony would have been wiped from existence." Sevrak was unmoved. "And yet you left nearly half of them to die." A grim silence. Nouri exhaled, his tone measured. "We did what we could. If there had been another way, if saving them all had been possible, we would have taken it." His gaze swept across the chamber, steady but devoid of arrogance. "But war does not grant perfect choices. It only offers the choice between action and inaction. And we chose to act." The tension in the room thickened. Some representatives shifted uncomfortably, others sat in rigid silence. The truth was undeniable. When the rest of the galaxy turned away, humanity had stepped forward. Not because they sought destruction, but because when no one else would take the risk, humanity did. Sevrak's voice cut through the chamber before the murmurs of the council could settle. "And yet, Chancellor Nouri," Sevrak said, his 6 eyes gleaming like sharpened blades, "how many worlds have burned beneath the shadow of your flag? You call yourselves defenders. Tell me, who defends the ones who fall to your weapons?" The holoprojectors flickered, and the chamber dimmed once more. This time, the image that materialized was different from the previous battle. There were no desperate escape efforts, no civilians fleeing under fire, no calculated maneuvers to minimize casualties. There was only ruin. A dead world, blackened and broken, its once thriving cities reduced to hollowed-out skeletons of metal and stone. Fragments of an armada drifted lifelessly in orbit, their twisted remains caught in a slow, eternal dance through the void. The atmosphere was gone, stripped away by forces too vast to comprehend. It was nothing more than a lifeless husk. "This was the planet Varnis," Sevrak continued, his voice carrying the weight of accusation. "A world of 14 billion souls. And yet, when the war ended, there was nothing left. No surrender, no survivors. Not even an enemy left to fight." Several delegates recoiled subtly. Others sat in stunned silence, staring at the destruction suspended in the air above them. Even those who had sided with humanity thus far hesitated, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Nouri's expression remained impassive, but his grip on the edge of the podium tightened. He knew this moment was coming. The holo display shifted, rewinding to the battle itself. The council watched as a vast enemy fleet, larger even than the one that had besieged R-3, encircled the planet. The forces of the Zirash, an empire that had waged war against the council for centuries, had entrenched themselves deep within Varnis. "And so," Sevrak continued, his voice sharp as a blade, "when the council could not break the Zirash's lines, when every tactic, every fleet, and every attempt at negotiation had failed, who did they call?" The answer was evident. The hologram zoomed in, showing the arrival of a single human dreadnought, the UES Daedalus. The massive warship, sleek and angular, was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It dwarfed the Zirash fleet, not in sheer size, but in its presence. Its hull, black as the abyss, seemed to drink in the light around it. Its weapons remained silent, its presence alone sending ripples of unease through the enemy fleet. They did not know what was coming, but they feared it. "Humanity did not come with a fleet," Sevrak said. "They came with a single weapon." The Daedalus fired. A beam of searing white light, not like traditional energy weapons, but something more, something unnatural. It lanced through the Zirash capital ships as though they were made of paper, their hulls dissolving in an instant. The energy wave expanded outward, consuming everything in its path. The Zirash fleet tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. And then, Sevrak said, his voice lowering to a near whisper, it reached the planet. The council watched as the surface of Varnis convulsed. The energy strike didn't merely destroy military targets, it ignited the very crust of the world. The atmosphere superheated in seconds, flash-burning entire continents. The seas vaporized, the cities, the people, the land itself. It all became nothing more than a memory. The light faded. Where a planet had once been, now only an asteroid field remained. A silence heavier than the void itself settled over the chamber. Sevrak turned back to Nuri, his gaze unreadable. You call yourselves defenders, Chancellor. You claim to be necessary. But I ask you, what necessity was there in this? His voice rose, sweeping through the chamber. If humanity can erase a world with a single order, how long until one of those worlds is ours? More murmurs now, some fearful, others uncertain. The tide was shifting. Nuri exhaled slowly. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on him. He had expected a battle of words today, but this was something more. He looked at the projection of Varnis, what was left of it. Then he looked back at Sevrak. You speak of destruction, Nuri said, his voice calm, focused. But we've already told you what that world was. Sevrak remained silent. A Zirash war factory. A machine that had already consumed 3 civilizations, while the council looked the other way. They used that world as a fortress, as a staging ground. And do you know what they were building? The hologram changed. A different set of data appeared. Council intelligence reports, intercepted enemy transmissions. A blueprint of a new Zirash superweapon, one that would have rendered shields obsolete, one that would have given them total military supremacy. They weren't just manufacturing ships, Nuri said. They were manufacturing extinction. He turned back to the council. There was no diplomatic option, he said. No negotiation. No surrender. The Zirash would not have stopped. They had already proven that, time and time again. The decision was made. That world, or 10 others. And so we did what no one else was willing to do. His gaze locked onto Sevrak's. You ask if we will one day do this to you, Nuri said, stepping forward. Let me be clear. If you seek to conquer, to enslave, to erase entire civilizations, then you will not have to wonder. You will know. Sevrak stiffened. But if you do not, Nuri continued, his voice steady, then you will never have to. Silence. The chamber was no longer as unified in its unease. Some of the murmurs had faded. Some of the gazes, once filled with doubt, now carried something else, understanding. Sevrak's eyes blinked several times. He had delivered his strongest argument, but the Chancellor had not fallen. The debate was far from over. The council chamber, once an echo chamber of unity, had become a battlefield of shifting loyalties. Accusations clashed with uncertainty, voices rising in heated whispers. Some delegates leaned forward, their eyes locked onto Nuri with newfound consideration. Others withdrew into themselves, their rigid postures betraying silent unease. The air was thick with the tension of a galaxy on the edge of decision. The representative of the Yelthari, a tall, avian-featured diplomat named Val Kethis, turned to his peers. His sleek, iridescent feathers shifted in color, a sign of internal conflict among his kind. The humans do not operate as we do, but their results are undeniable. How many of us would be here if not for their actions? A member of the amphibious Alaris, Delegate Shun Alec, folded his webbed fingers together, his translucent skin pulsing faintly with bioluminescent tension. And yet, if they hold the power to annihilate entire fleets, entire worlds, what stops them from turning that power against any of us? Across the chamber, a member of the massive Tarsid, their reptilian scales glinting under the council's artificial glow, let out a slow rumble, a sound of contemplation rather than outright objection. Perhaps the real question, the Tarsid delegate mused, is whether the humans remain necessary. Sevrak's voice sliced through the growing debate. They are not only unnecessary, they are a liability. We have all witnessed their actions, their willingness to escalate every war they enter, and now they seek to justify their existence through necessity, as if their unpredictability is something to be embraced rather than feared. Nuri let the accusation settle before he spoke. "You say that humanity is unpredictable," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You say we are dangerous. But tell me, Sevrak, what would have happened if we had not been there?" The chamber fell quiet again. "You all speak of chaos, of the destruction we bring. But let me remind you of a battle where, had we not intervened, none of you would be here to argue against us today." The lights dimmed, and the holographic displays shifted once more. A new battle emerged, not of fire and devastation, but of sheer, overwhelming despair. "This was the Battle of Genvar's Maw," Nuri said, his tone heavier now. "A war that did not start because of us, but one that would have ended with all of you buried beneath the ashes of your own civilizations." The image flickered to show a vast expanse of space, a sector deep within Council territory. The camera panned over a colossal rift in space, Genvar's Maw, an unstable region that had long been thought impassable. The Maw had been the Council's greatest natural defense, a shield of gravitational distortions and subspace anomalies that had protected its core worlds for centuries, until it failed. From within the rift, the enemy emerged, a species known as the Kathir, a force unlike any the galaxy had ever faced. They did not seek territory. They did not seek resources. They sought only to erase. They did not negotiate, did not hesitate, did not even acknowledge surrender. To the Kathir, civilizations were not adversaries. They were fuel, and the galaxy was their feast. A fleet of living vessels, monstrous and vast, their hulls pulsing with an organic glow, had poured forth like a tide of nightmares. They did not communicate, they did not negotiate, they consumed. The Council had never seen a force like this before, Nuri continued. Fleet after fleet fell before them. Conventional weapons barely slowed them down. For every ship destroyed, 3 more took its place. The image shifted again, showing a desperate engagement, the combined fleets of dozens of species, their formations tight, their defenses coordinated. Yet, despite their unity, they were losing. "Our technology was failing," Nuri said. "Your weapons, your tactics, they were not enough." A massive explosion rocked the display. The Kathir ships adapted, their bodies twisting, consuming debris to regenerate, to become stronger. Council vessels were torn apart, their hulls stripped away as if they were mere sustenance. Then, the tide shifted. A new fleet entered the battle, smaller, sleeker ships, moving in unorthodox formations, weaving between enemy lines with impossible precision. The Terran 5th Battle Group had arrived. "Humanity did not come with superior firepower," Nuri stated. "We did not come with overwhelming numbers. We came with something else." At first, it was just a shadow on the battlefield, a single vessel, moving with eerie precision through the chaos. It did not match the hulking warships of the Council, nor the living monstrosities of the Kathir. And yet, when it moved, the enemy flinched. The UES Thunder Dragon had arrived. Its surface shimmered with an unfamiliar energy, its weapons glowing with a faint blue light. "This," Nuri said, gesturing to the vessel, "was the first deployment of Project Thunder Dragon, a human-developed technology designed specifically for an enemy like the Kathir." The chamber was silent as they watched the Thunder Dragon engage the enemy. Unlike the Council ships, it did not fire conventional weapons. Instead, pulses of energy rippled outward, disrupting the Kathir's regenerative abilities, severing the connections between their organic vessels. For the first time in the war, the Kathir fleet faltered. This was not brute force, Nuri emphasized. This was understanding. We did not simply throw more weapons at them. We learned how they functioned, how they adapted, and we created something that could adapt faster. The battle played out in full. With the Thunder Dragon leading the charge, the human fleet moved in coordination, exploiting every opening. Within hours, the tide had turned. Within a day, the Kathir were in retreat. And within a week, they were gone. The hologram faded. The chamber remained still. Nuri let the silence stretch before he spoke again. "You call us unpredictable," he said, his voice measured. "You call us dangerous. But I ask you, where would your people be if we had not been there? How many of your worlds would be nothing more than hollowed-out husks? How many of you would be speaking today if humanity had chosen not to act?" Sevrak did not respond. Nuri turned his gaze across the chamber. Some delegates avoided his eyes. Others, those who had once whispered against humanity's presence, now sat in contemplative silence. "We do not seek war," Nuri continued, his gaze sweeping over the chamber. "We do not revel in destruction, but we understand one truth that many of you refuse to accept. Survival is not won with hesitation. When the time comes, and it will come, you will not ask for peace. You will not call for negotiations. You will call for us, and we will answer. Just as we always have." A long pause. Then, a single voice spoke from the council seats. "This technology," said Kel Orin, a representative of the Vorakai, his feline-like features unreadable. "Project Thunder Dragon. You say it was designed to counter the Kathir. But if humanity is capable of developing such weapons, what else are you capable of?" Nuri met his gaze. "Project Thunder Dragon exists because it had to exist. Without it, we would have lost. Without it, you would have lost. We will always do what is necessary to ensure survival, nothing more." The chamber remained tense. Some species, for the first time, looked at humanity not with fear, but with something else, a begrudging recognition. Others, however, were not convinced, and Sevrak, though silent, was already preparing his next move. A holographic projection of Project Thunder Dragon faded, but the tension in the chamber remained sharp as a blade. For the first time, some of the most steadfast opponents of humanity sat in silence, contemplating what they had just seen. Others, however, were not swayed. "Is this what we have allowed?" Kel Orin of the Vorakai growled, his feline-like features dark with suspicion. "A species that, in the span of mere centuries, has not only surpassed our technology, but created weapons we can barely comprehend?" A representative of the Tholvek Union, a species of towering quadrupedal beings with hardened plates along their backs, rumbled in agreement. "They claim necessity. They claim adaptation. But how long before we become the next threat they decide to neutralize?" At the other side of the chamber, Val Kethis, the Yelthari delegate, leaned forward. His feathers rippled through a spectrum of colors, indicating his inner turmoil. "And yet, without them, we would not be here. The Kathir were not an enemy we could outthink, outmaneuver, or negotiate with. Our survival is proof enough that human innovation is more than just destruction. It is creation." The chamber erupted into a cacophony of voices, splitting into two camps. Some called for immediate action against the humans. Others argued that without their ingenuity, the council would have long since collapsed under its own failures. Then Sevrak stood. He had been waiting, calculating. And now, as the moment reached its peak, he spoke. "Enough!" The word was not shouted, but it carried through the chamber like a hammer striking steel. The murmurs died as every delegate turned to face him. "You speak of necessity," Sevrak continued, his voice slow, melodic. "You speak of survival. And yet, each time the humans stand before us, the stories they tell are the same. Destruction, annihilation, war. You call it adaptation. I call it escalation." He turned his gaze back to Nuri. You justify every horror with the phrase, "It had to be done." So tell me, Chancellor, how far does your necessity go? With a flick of his hand, the holoprojectors activated once more. The chamber dimmed, and a new recording took shape above them. It was grainy at first, a battlefield rendered in fractured visuals, as if the footage itself had been taken in the middle of chaos. Then the image sharpened, a war-torn city, its streets carved apart by orbital bombardment. Smoke curled against the sky, and through the debris, figures in armor moved swiftly. Human soldiers, their visors glowing dimly as they navigated through the ruins. Their weapons were not standard issue. There was no energy fire, no railgun bursts. Instead, they carried canisters, small, metallic, and unmarked. The image shifted again. A deployment. The canisters were activated. A plume of vapor spread through the shattered buildings, rolling through the corridors like a silent storm. And then the screaming began. The chamber was deathly silent as they watched. The enemy forces, once entrenched and unyielding, collapsed in droves. Their bodies convulsed violently, their skin turning gray, then black. A biological agent, fast-acting, irreversible. No distinction between soldiers and civilians. The siege of Draken 4, Sevrak intoned. A human outpost under attack by the Zendar, outnumbered, overwhelmed. And when they could not win through conventional means, they turned to this. The image zoomed in on a single human soldier, his armor scratched and stained. He was speaking into a comm unit. Authorization denied. Damn it, we don't have time. We drop this now or we're all dead. The chamber darkened again. The holoprojectors shut off. Sevrak let the silence stretch. This was never authorized, he said coldly. The Council had no knowledge of this action. The use of biological warfare had long been outlawed by every governing body represented here. And yet, in their desperation, the humans made the decision themselves. They did not seek approval. They did not wait for deliberation. They acted. And in doing so, they erased an entire population. Soldiers, civilians, non-combatants alike. Sevrak's 6 eyes bore into Nuri. They tell us they are necessary. They tell us they are our defenders. But I ask you, what happens the day they decide we are no longer worth defending? The chamber felt colder. Nuri did not react immediately. He let the weight of the revelation settle over the room. He could feel the uncertainty thick in the air. Sevrak had played his final hand, and it was a strong one. Nuri paused, steadying his voice. Then he spoke. You show us this as proof of our cruelty, he said. But let me ask you, how many of you know what happened before this decision was made? He stepped forward. Draken 4 was an outpost, yes. But it was more than that. It was a refugee hub, filled with civilians fleeing from the Zendar invasion. There were no warships, no reinforcements coming. Just a handful of soldiers standing between thousands of innocents, and an army that had no intention of taking prisoners. He gestured toward the now dark hollow projector. You saw the end. You did not see the beginning. The display flickered back on. This time, the footage showed the early days of the siege. The Zendar forces sweeping through the outer colonies, executing every non-combatant they found. They did not take prisoners. They did not negotiate. They simply purged. The image changed again, now inside the human outpost. A captain, his face grim, was speaking into a console. We are running out of time. Evacuation ships have been destroyed. They are coming. We have one option left. I need authorization. A long pause. Then, a voice from the other end of the line. Authorization denied. Silence. Then the captain turned to his men. Then we do it ourselves. The chamber brightened once more. The hollow projector shut down. Nuri's voice did not rise, but it carried through the silence like a blade through glass. You call it a war crime, he said. And perhaps it was. But tell me, if you had been there, standing between a massacre and the only choice left to stop it, What would you have done? His gaze swept across the chamber. You judge us for our actions, but you do so from the safety we have provided. The lives that were saved that day, the families, the children, do they matter less because of the means by which they were preserved? Silence. Sevrak straightened. And that, he said, his tone final, is why humanity must be removed from the Council's military affairs permanently. They will justify anything. They will excuse any action. He paused, and then continued. Not because we fear them, but because we know that one day there will be no one left to stop them. His gaze swept the room. I call for a vote. The removal of humanity from all military operations under the Council's jurisdiction, effective immediately. A cold stillness fell over the chamber. The decision was coming. But before anyone could speak, before any delegate could raise their voice, a deafening alarm erupted through the halls. The chamber shook violently. The obsidian table at the center trembled, cracks forming along its polished surface as sirens howled through the corridors of the Grand Council station. The once orderly assembly of representatives erupted into chaos, voices clashing as panic spread like wildfire. A deep, mechanical voice blared through the station's communication system. Emergency alert. Unidentified hostile forces have breached outer perimeter defenses. Evacuate priority sectors immediately. Repeat. Enemy forces have breached perimeter. Beyond the station, the void trembled. Space itself seemed to ripple as the fleet emerged, not from hyperspace, not from any known transit lane, but from the very fabric of reality itself. Dark, jagged silhouettes materialized like shadows stretching under an unseen sun. They did not advance chaotically. They moved with purpose, with precision, like a hand closing around the throat of a dying creature. The Council Defense Fleet, once thought to be impenetrable, had already begun to fall apart. The first wave of enemy fire had not been traditional energy weapons or kinetic rounds. It had been something more insidious. A series of spatial distortions erupted across the defensive formation, twisting gravity in ways that shattered hull integrity before impact. Council warships buckled and imploded, their reinforced structures collapsing inwards as if space itself had betrayed them. The lucky ones were merely disabled, left drifting with dead systems and no hope of recovery. The unlucky? Gone in seconds. The station shook again, sending several delegates stumbling to the floor. Nuri remained standing, gripping the edge of the table as the emergency lighting bathed the chamber in a flickering red hue. The entire structure groaned under the strain of external bombardment. "This is impossible," Shun Alec of the Alaris gasped, his translucent skin pulsing erratically with alarm. "The outer defenses. How did they get past the perimeter fleet so quickly?" Outside, the enemy ships surged forward, moving with unnatural synchronization, like extensions of a singular mind. Their weapon systems shifted configurations mid-flight, adjusting to counter the few surviving Council vessels attempting to rally. A formation of Vashiri dreadnoughts moved into a defensive position, their heavy plasma batteries spinning up to unleash a retaliatory barrage. But the invaders adapted instantly. Before the weapons could fire, a ripple pulsed through the enemy fleet, a cascading energy field that nullified the dreadnoughts' charge cycles, forcing their systems into an emergency shutdown. Then came the second wave. The enemy did not send boarding craft. They sent something worse. Tendrils of living metal slithered across the void, latching onto the hulls of disabled ships like parasites seeking a new host. The metal twisted, reshaped, flesh merging with steel, circuitry consumed and rewritten. Council warships that had stood for centuries became something else. And then, in eerie unison, they turned their weapons on their former allies. They had been claimed. In the chamber, Sevrak watched in frozen horror as his own fleet, ships that had served the Zalari for generations, turned against them, now operating under the control of an unknown force. "This," he whispered, "this is not an invasion. It's a harvest." Another detonation rocked the station, this time closer. The floor beneath them trembled, dust falling from the towering ceilings of the chamber. From the emergency holo feeds, live tactical updates flickered chaotically. Council Marines were engaging enemy forces in the docking bays. The invaders had breached the station. They were inside. The feeds showed strange, shifting entities moving through the corridors, their forms barely holding shape, as if they existed on the edge of reality itself. Council security forces opened fire, but their energy weapons had little effect. Rounds passed through their bodies, distorting like light bending through liquid. "Council Guard forces are collapsing," a Vorokai officer shouted from his personal comm unit. "We can't hold them." Another explosion. This time, it was close enough to send several delegates sprawling onto the floor. A column of energy slammed into the station's shielding grid, overloading key power nodes. Alarms blared as sections of the outer ring lost artificial gravity, sending debris and bodies spiraling into the air. The Speaker of the Council, a normally unshakable presence, staggered forward, his voice strained. "We must evacuate immediately." Then the lights flickered again. The station lurched, as if struck by something massive, and in that moment, all eyes turned to Nuri. High Speaker Korvaleth, his normally composed expression now pale and strained, finally broke his silence. His elongated, silver-gray features, typical of the Vorkari, one of the oldest species in the Council, betrayed something beyond concern. It was desperation. His gaze locked onto the human Chancellor, not with disdain, not with hesitation, but with a silent plea. "Chancellor," Korvaleth's voice barely held together, his authority crumbling under the weight of impending annihilation. Another impact shook the chamber, forcing him to brace against the table. He lifted his gaze, no longer filled with doubt, no longer questioning, only pleading. "The Council formally requests your assistance." Nuri didn't move. He didn't blink. The silence stretched, the weight of the moment hanging like a blade over the chamber. Another explosion. This one was close. The Council shielding grid fractured, and a section of the chamber's outer walls began to buckle under the force of sustained fire. Korvaleth stepped closer, his voice now barely above a whisper. "Please save us." For the first time since the hearing began, there was no debate, no murmurs, no resistance, only fear. Nuri raised his wrist communicator, and, with the same calm he had maintained throughout the trial, uttered 4 words. "Admiral, the Council is under attack." There was a pause, a fraction of a second where time seemed to stretch infinitely. Then, through the secure channel, a voice responded, cool, measured, and edged with the sharp bite of amusement. "Yes, sir. As expected." A brief pause. Then, with a tone of quiet amusement, "They won't even see us coming." A tear in space erupted just beyond the Grand Council station, a shimmering distortion followed by the thunderous emergence of the Third Human Fleet. The black hulls of human warships cut through the void like hunting blades, their formations tightening in an instant. They had arrived precisely on time. At the center of the formation, the UES Warhammer, a Leviathan-class battleship, dwarfed the rest of the fleet. Its reinforced plating gleamed under the glow of the nearby star, its colossal mass defying the very concept of conventional warfare. This was not a ship. It was a statement. On its command bridge, Admiral Wesley Riley stood with his hands clasped behind his back, observing the unfolding battlefield with an almost amused expression. His crisp navy blue uniform bore the insignia of United Earth Defense, and though his posture remained composed, the keen edge in his gaze revealed the strategist within. "Visual confirmation of hostiles," Lieutenant Max Annabel, his tactical officer, reported. His voice clipped but steady. "They're already inside the station." "And the Council's forces?" Riley asked, his tone carrying the weight of inevitability. "What's left of them is fighting a losing battle," Annabel responded, eyes flicking across the glowing tactical interface. "Enemy fleet is using gravitational distortions to collapse defensive structures before engaging. They've already hijacked sections of the Council's own fleet and turned them against their allies." They got played, Riley said, without a hint of surprise. Then, with a calm that bordered on casual, he turned toward Captain Raymond McManus, commanding officer of the UES Manowar, a battlecruiser flanking the Warhammer. "Captain, I want a firing solution now." "Aye, Admiral," McManus responded instantly. "Weapons hot. Targeting priority?" Riley's eyes narrowed. "Give them something to think about. Weapons free. Engage at will." The first volley came before the enemy could react. A concentrated barrage of kinetic slugs and plasma lances tore through the enemy formation, shattering their forward elements before they could register the counterattack. The gravitational distortions rippled, momentarily destabilized by the sheer kinetic impact of railgun rounds traveling at near relativistic speeds. The enemy fleet reeled, not in destruction, but in confusion. Their hive-like coordination stuttered, momentarily out of sync. Then, Phase 2 began. The second wave of the human assault came not from the capital ships, but from the unseen strike craft already in motion. UES Umbral Squadron, a formation of stealth-equipped interceptors, uncloaked in the midst of enemy lines. Using the distraction created by the fleet's first salvo, they weaved between the distortions, moving too fast for the enemy to compensate. Their payloads weren't traditional warheads, they were something else. Quantum disruption charges. As the first detonations rippled through enemy formations, entire sections of their fleet flickered, blinking in and out of phase, their own spatial manipulation fields collapsing on themselves. Riley smirked. "Let's see how they like it when we play with their toys." But the enemy was already adapting. Their formations shifted, recalibrating. The distortions reformed, but this time, instead of targeting the station, they lashed outward toward the human fleet. The Warhammer's shields groaned under the sudden, unnatural strain, as gravitational shearing forces tried to rip through its structure. "Shields at 65%, Lieutenant Annibal shouted. "They're targeting our spinal integrity." Riley remained calm. "Reinforce with auxiliary power. Keep firing, don't stop." The enemy was learning, but so were they. On the council station, chaos reigned. Security teams desperately fought to hold defensive corridors, but the enemy was overwhelming. The station shuddered again, and High Speaker Corvelith struggled to stay on his feet. Through the trembling structure, Nuri remained still. He watched the live feed of the battle, noting every moment, every shift, every adaptation. He activated his communicator. "Admiral, our defenses are collapsing. We need ground support inside the station now." Riley responded instantly. "Already handled." A sharp streak of fire entered the station's docking bay as a series of drop pods slammed into the bulkheads, each one breaching the station's corridors with tactical efficiency. The docking bay doors detonated inward, metal screeching as armored boots hit the ground in unison. The Space Marines had arrived. Their exoframes absorbed the dim emergency lighting, their movements mechanical, precise, lethal. Their visors flickered with real-time data, calculating every possible threat before their enemies could even react. They did not advance. They hunted, and the station's halls became a battlefield unlike any the invaders had ever faced. At the forefront, Major Jonas Hetfield, his voice crackling over squad comms, gave a single command. Sweep and clear. No hesitation. The station erupted in close-quarters combat. The alien invaders, once unchallenged, found themselves outmaneuvered. They were hulking, armored creatures, their bodies encased in chitinous plating, segmented like overlapping blades, giving them a jagged, predatory appearance. Their 4 powerful limbs ended in clawed appendages, capable of tearing through bulkheads with ease. Their faces were recessed, hidden beneath heavy ridges of natural armor, with glowing slits where eyes should have been. Not seeing, but sensing movement and heat. Their weapons were integrated into their bodies, organic cannons fused to their forearms, expelling superheated plasma in violent, erratic bursts. Human forces didn't fight in rigid formations. They moved fluidly, adapting in real time, using cover and misdirection instead of brute force. Hetfield fired a burst of plasma into a shifting entity, but it phased away before impact. He didn't hesitate. He rolled to the side, activated a modulator on his wrist, and switched firing mode. Pulse disruptor rounds. The next shot landed, the enemy convulsing violently as the cohesion of its form shattered, sending it crashing into the floor in a pulsing heap. Confirmed weak point. Adjust fire patterns. Cut them down. Human forces adapted instantly, modulating weapon frequencies to prevent the enemy from phasing through attacks. The once unbeatable invaders found themselves struggling against an enemy that refused to play by their rules. Back in space, the tide was turning. Human forces had suffered losses, but not enough. Their non-traditional warfare, their ability to break patterns and rewrite the rules of engagement, was working. The once coordinated alien onslaught was faltering, its hive-like formations disrupting into fractured clusters, each struggling to adapt to the relentless assault. The human forces had done what no other species had. They had forced the enemy to react, not lead. Admiral Wesley Riley stood on the UES Warhammer's command deck, watching as the battle turned. His arms remained crossed, his expression unreadable, though the glint in his eyes betrayed a quiet satisfaction. "Confirm enemy fleet collapse," Lieutenant Max Annibal reported, voice sharp over the comms. "They're attempting a retreat maneuver, but their cohesion is gone." Riley smirked, then gave the order. "Deny them the exit." From the depths of space, human warships repositioned, their maneuvering thrusters firing in bursts to create a new kill box. The enemy, now a scattered mess of damaged and disoriented ships, found themselves corralled into a death trap, a calculated, unavoidable funnel. And then the Warhammer's main battery fired. A pulse of light ignited the void, and in its wake, an unstoppable kinetic lance tore through the center of the alien fleet. Enemy ships ripped apart in a cascade of detonations, their unnatural hulls folding under the raw force of mass-driver artillery, traveling at incomprehensible speeds. Across the battlefield, human strike squadrons followed up on the opening. The Umbral Squadron, the stealth interceptors that had first disabled enemy distortions, led targeted runs on the surviving enemy cruisers, cutting apart engines and command nodes before they could escape. What had started as an unstoppable invasion force had become prey. Inside the Grand Council station, the fight had shifted just as dramatically. The Space Marines, their heavy exoframes scorched and bloodied, were pressing the advantage, driving the remaining enemy forces into a bottleneck near the central power core. The invaders had come expecting easy conquest, believing themselves to be the apex of warfare. Instead, they had met something far worse: humans who refused to die. Major Jonas Hetfield, his visor cracked and armor dented, drove his gauntleted fist into an enemy warrior, the impact sending the alien staggering against the bulkhead. A single plasma round from his sidearm ended it. "Push forward!" Hetfield barked. "We finish this now!" The enemy, once unrelenting, was now desperate. They had underestimated the human capability for adaptation, and now they were paying for it. The end did not come in a single instant. It came as a domino of destruction. One ship lost control, then another, then a dozen more. The alien fleet, once an unrelenting tide, now fractured into chaos, their once perfect coordination reduced to blind desperation. The Warhammer's final salvo cut through their flagship, its core imploding in a violent burst of collapsing gravity, sending shockwaves across the wreckage of what had once been an invasion force. The defenders of the Council Station surged forward, their retreat forgotten in the wake of the relentless human assault. The Space Marines led the charge, their exoframes carved with scorch marks, their visors glowing like the eyes of executioners. The invaders, once so certain of victory, now found themselves being hunted. Hall by hall, corridor by corridor, they were driven back. No mercy, no hesitation. What had started as a defense had become a purge. And then, the abyss swallowed them whole. Their flagship, the towering colossus that had commanded the invasion, buckled under the sheer force of a gravitational implosion. The event horizon formed in an instant, pulling steel and flesh alike into a singularity of annihilation. Shockwaves rippled outward, ripping apart what remained of their once mighty fleet. The few ships that remained tried to flee, but there was nowhere left to run. In the darkness of space beneath the burning wreckage of their lost invasion, only one truth remained. They had been defeated. And just like that, it was over. Inside the council chamber, fires flickered along the shattered pillars of the once imposing hall. The polished floors cracked from the station's earlier bombardment. Delegates stood among the wreckage, some in stunned silence, others watching the humans, their expressions unreadable. The survivors knew what had happened. They had not repelled the invasion. The humans had saved them. High Speaker Korveleth, his robes torn, slowly stepped forward, his gaze locked onto Chancellor Case Nuri. The Vorkari leader, once an unshakable symbol of neutrality, looked weaker now, not just in body, but in presence. There was no more debate to be had. Sevrak, the accuser, still stood, his plated form covered in dust from the destruction around them. His 6 eyes shifted between the devastation and the Marines standing among it. He had one last move to make. "This is what we feared." Sevrak's voice was hoarse, but it still carried the unchecked force of a species that acts without restraint. "We were right to exile them before, and we must do it again. Enough." Korveleth's voice, though shaken, carried finality. The High Speaker turned to the council, his gaze locked in place. "The humans saved this station. They saved us all. There will be no exile, no debate. This discussion is over." A hush fell over the chamber. Sevrak stiffened, his hands curling into tight, clawed fists. He turned toward the others, searching for support. None came. Even the staunchest critics of humanity remained silent. For the first time, there was no opposition. "The humans," Korveleth continued, his voice growing stronger now, "are not just reinstated within this council." He turned toward Nuri, his gaze heavy. "They will be given full authority to act in the defense of the council. When war comes to our doorstep again, they will not need to ask permission. They will do as they must." The weight of those words settled into the air like a funeral bell. This was not just a reinstatement. This was an acknowledgement of truth. The truth that humanity was necessary. Sevrak's mouth opened, but no words came. He had lost. For the first time in the history of the Grand Council, no one opposed the presence of humanity. The silence stretched, long and heavy. Then, without a word, Sevrak turned and walked away. The fires in the chamber had begun to die down, the distant sounds of battle now nothing more than a memory. Chancellor Case Nuri stood where he had been since the beginning, his expression stoic. He had not fought for a victory. He had fought for the right to exist. And now, that right had been acknowledged. But as he stood there, watching the broken council recover, he knew this was only the beginning. Humanity had proven themselves once again, and soon they would have to do it all over again. Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Oh, and one last thing. Every great soldier knows that to survive and become a hero, taking care of yourself is key. So before you go, check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's important. And I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.